HOA Karen demolished my son's treehouse, splintering into pieces as my child watched in tears. That's how it began. A sound so sharp, so final. It echoed through our backyard like a gunshot. The crack of wood snapping, the thud of beams hitting the dirt, the rustle of leaves raining down from the branches they once supported. I had built that treehouse with my own hands. Every nail, every plank, every hour spent sanding and measuring had been an act of love. And now, in broad daylight, with my 6-year-old standing barefoot in the grass, it was gone. I remember my boy's face first, his mouth open, too stunned to cry. He clutched the little plastic bucket he used to haul toy soldiers up into his fort, his knuckles white, his chest rising too fast. And then came the tears. Hot, quick, unstoppable. He looked at me as if I could fix it, as if I could rush in and push time backward, but all I could do was hold his shoulders steady. Because before us stood the reason for this destruction. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, stood with her arms crossed, her lips pursed so tight it looked painful. Behind her, a hired crew in orange vests stepped away from the wreckage. They had followed her orders, taking crowbars and saws to the little fortress of childhood joy that had sat safely in our backyard for months. The treehouse hadn't just been wood nailed into a tree. It was an escape, a place where my son could pretend to be a pirate or a superhero, or simply a boy with the freedom to climb above the world and dream. And in less than an hour, it had been erased. Rules are rules, Karen finally said. Her voice was flat, almost rehearsed, as if she'd been waiting for this exact moment. She tilted her chin toward the HOA handbook tucked under her arm. Unauthorized structures are prohibited. We've been over this. Unauthorized structures? This wasn't a shed or a fence or some massive extension to our home. It was a child's playhouse. A small wooden cabin in the branches of an oak tree that had been there longer than Karen had lived in the neighborhood. I had checked. No ordinance, no city code. Not even the HOA's fine print clauses said a word about tree houses. But Karen had declared it an eyesore at the last meeting, and once she decided something, there was no reasoning with her. Neighbors had gathered, some peeking from behind their curtains, others standing on the edge of the sidewalk. A few of them looked sympathetic, shaking their heads at Karen's cruelty. But most stayed silent, too afraid to cross her. That's the kind of power Karen wielded, not real legal authority, but fear. Fear of fines, fear of harassment, fear of becoming the next target. I crouched beside my son, wiping the dirt from his cheek, where a splinter had grazed him. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered, though my throat burned a lie I could barely swallow. "We'll fix this." But inside, I wasn't calm. I wasn't forgiving. A storm was rising, and I knew this wouldn't end with broken boards and tears. When I finally stood, Karen smirked as if she won a battle no one else understood. "If you rebuild, the fines will triple," she warned. "And next time, it won't just be the treehouse." She turned and walked away, heels clicking against the sidewalk like a gavel hitting wood. A sentence had been passed, but I refused to accept it. Behind her, the tree stood bare, scarred with jagged cuts where beams had been ripped away. The air still smelled of sawdust, sharp and raw. My son buried his face against me, trembling, and in that moment, something inside me hardened. Karen thought this was over. She thought she could reduce my child's joy to rubble and walk away untouched. But she had forgotten one thing. When you harm a child, when you make them cry, when you rob them of innocence, there is no rule book, no HOA clause, no smug smile that can protect you. This was only the beginning. The next morning, she was already at it again. Karen never wasted time. By dawn, she had posted in the neighborhood group chat, attaching photos of the demolished treehouse like trophies. Her caption read, "Rule enforcement is never easy, but maintaining property values requires tough decisions. Unauthorized structures will not be tolerated." Unauthorized. That word kept bouncing in my skull. She had reduced my son's laughter, his adventures, his secret world of make-believe, to an unauthorized structure. When I walked outside, the street was buzzing with whispers. A couple across the road avoided eye contact as they loaded their car. Another neighbor gave me a sympathetic nod, but said nothing. Karen was already marching down the sidewalk, binder in hand, as if patrolling her kingdom. She stopped at the edge of my yard, peering at the pile of broken boards stacked against the oak tree. "You should have asked for approval," she said. "Now, this doesn't have to get worse, but if you try to rebuild—" I cut her off, my voice sharper than I intended. "You endanger my son. He was standing right there when your crew tore it down. What if a beam had fallen on him? What if—" Karen waved a hand dismissively. "Children exaggerate. He was fine. And besides, safety is another reason why unauthorized structures can't stand. Liability is a serious issue, and the HOA won't be responsible for your projects." Her tone dripped with condescension, as if my son's trauma was a minor inconvenience, as if his tears were just part of her paperwork. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "This isn't over, Karen. You cross a line." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't flinch. "The only line I see," she said coolly, "is the one in the bylaws. And you crossed it when you built without permission. Remember, fines can add up fast. Don't test me." With that, she turned and strode off, her binder snapping shut like the lid of a coffin. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the HOA rulebook spread before me, page after page, clause after clause, searching for the one sentence that justified what she had done. It wasn't there, not even close. The Treehouse hadn't violated a single official rule, but I realized something important. Karen didn't need rules. She was the rule, at least in her mind. She thrived on intimidation, on convincing people she had power she didn't actually possess. And for too long, everyone, including me, had let her get away with it. My son padded into the kitchen in his pajamas, dragging his stuffed bear. "Daddy," he said softly, "why does the bad lady hate me?" I froze. That question, so innocent, so heartbreaking, cut deeper than any fine or threat ever could. I pulled him into my lap, holding him tight. "She doesn't hate you," I said, though my chest ached at the lie. "She just doesn't understand. But I promise you this, she's not going to win." In his small eyes, I saw the flicker of hope return, and in that moment, my resolve hardened into steel. Karen thought she had ended the story with splinters and threats. But the truth was, she had just written the first chapter of a much bigger fight, one where she wouldn't be the hero of her own rulebook, but the villain in a tale where justice was waiting just around the corner. And I was ready to make sure of it. The morning after Karen's demolition parade, the neighborhood felt different. It wasn't just the empty space where my son's treehouse once stood, the scarred oak with jagged bolts sticking out like broken teeth. It was a silence, a heavy, watchful quiet, as if every house had grown eyes. Curtains shifted when I walked outside. Doors opened just enough to let whispers leak into the street. Karen had made her move, and now the community was deciding which side of the line to stand on. By noon, that silence broke. A group of neighbors gathered on the corner. I could hear the low hum of their voices, some tinged with sympathy, others with agreement for what Karen had done. "Property values," one man muttered. "Can't have everyone building whatever they want." Another voice shot back. "It was a treehouse for a kid, for crying out loud." She went too far. I walked closer, my son's small hand gripping mine. The moment they saw me, the circle broke. A woman I barely knew, Mrs. Jenkins from 3 houses down, gave me a thin smile. "Sorry about the treehouse," she said softly, like someone offering condolences at a funeral. Then, almost immediately, she lowered her voice. "But you know how Karen is. Best not to stir the pot." Stir the pot. That phrase made my jaw clench. Karen had cut down more than would yesterday. She had cut into my son's spirit. And now, people were acting like I should let it go? No, not this time. As I turned away, I caught sight of Karen herself, striding down the block like she owned it, binder under her arm, lips pursed, eyes scanning each yard for infractions only she could see. She walked right up to our house, pausing at the oak tree as if inspecting her handiwork. My son's grip tightened on my hand. "You'll be receiving a notice," she said without preamble. "The debris pile must be removed within 48 hours. Failure to comply results in daily fines." I stared at her, unblinking. "You destroyed it. You clean it up." Karen's smirk widened, but her voice stayed icy. The HOA isn't responsible for unauthorized structures. That's on you. Behind us, the neighbors had fallen silent, their eyes darting back and forth like spectators at a tennis match. Karen thrived on these moments. The stage, the audience, the power to humiliate. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't planning to play her game. Not anymore. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the HOA handbook yet again, my son tugged on my sleeve. "Daddy," he said, "are we going to build another one?" His voice was hopeful, but it wavered at the edges, fragile as glass. I closed the book and looked at him. "We'll do something better. I promised. But first, we have to make sure the bad lady doesn't take it away again." He nodded, though I could see the worry in his eyes. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about a treehouse anymore. It was about teaching my son that bullies, even ones who hide behind rule books and fake authority, don't get to win. The gathering storm wasn't just in the neighborhood. It was inside me, and it was ready to break. The real confrontation happened 2 days later, on a Saturday afternoon. The sun was high, the air heavy, and the neighborhood was alive with the usual weekend sounds. Lawnmowers buzzing, kids riding bikes, dogs barking in fence yards. But all that faded when Karen appeared at the end of my driveway. She wasn't alone. She had 2 HOA board members with her, both older men who shuffled nervously beside her, clutching clipboards. Reinforcements. She always brought backup when she knew she was walking into a fight. Karen didn't knock. She didn't ring the doorbell. She just stood at the edge of the yard, hands on her hips, binder pressed tight against her chest. "We need to discuss compliance," she announced, loud enough for half the block to hear. I stepped out, my son watching from the living room window, his small face pressed against the glass. My blood boiled at the sight of Karen planting herself on my property like she had the right. "You've already caused enough damage," I said, my voice steady but edged with steel. "What more do you want?" Her smile was thin, brittle, a crack waiting to split. "It's not about what I want. It's about what the rules demand. You ignored the approval process. You violated the bylaws. And now, the HOA has no choice but to escalate. Fines, liens, possible legal action." She rattled off the words like a lawyer, reading charges. The 2 men beside her shifted uneasily. One cleared his throat. "Karen, maybe?" But she silenced him with a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "This isn't personal," she added, turning back to me. "It's about maintaining order. If everyone built whatever they pleased, this community would fall apart. Imagine the chaos." Chaos. That was her word for joy, for imagination, for the simple happiness of a child climbing into a treehouse. I couldn't hold back anymore. "You want to talk about rules?" I said, stepping closer. "Show me the line in your bylaws that bans treehouses. Show me the exact clause that gave you the right to bring strangers onto my property and tear down something I built for my son. Show me where it says you can endanger a child, because he was right there when you ordered your crew to start hacking away." For the first time, Karen faltered, just for a moment. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face before she masked it again with that infuriating smirk. "Safety concerns justify immediate action," she replied smoothly. "It's within the board discretion." One of the men with her finally spoke up, his voice low. "Karen, I'm not sure we should have handled it that way." Her head snapped toward him, fury flashing in her eyes. But it was too late. The crack in her armor was visible, and I wasn't about to let it close. "You put my son at risk," I said firmly. "And now you're threatening me with fines? No, this ends here. You're not the law, Karen. And the day you think you can play judge, jury, and executioner in this neighborhood is the day you'll regret it." The air between us was electric, charged with a tension that drew the attention of every set of eyes peeking from behind blinds and fences. Karen held my gaze, but I could see it, the twitch of her jaw, the faint red climbing her neck. She wasn't used to being challenged this way. Finally, she snapped her binder shut with a sharp clap. "You'll be hearing from us," she hissed, spinning on her heel. The 2 board members trailed after her, one looking back at me with something like guilt in his eyes. As they walked away, I felt my son slip out the front door, standing quietly at my side. "Daddy," he whispered, "did we win?" I looked down at him, his small hand slipping into mine. "Not yet," I said, "but we will." And as Karen's figure grew smaller in the distance, I knew this was no longer just a fight over wood and nails. It was a battle for dignity, for justice, for the simple right of a child to dream without fear, and I wasn't backing down. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, folded neatly in a white envelope with the HOA's logo stamped across the top. My stomach sank the second I saw it. Karen's fingerprints were all over this. I tore it open at the kitchen counter, my son still munching cereal at the table. The words leapt at me in black ink. Notice of violation. According to the letter, I owed the HOA $500 for erecting and maintaining an unauthorized structure in violation of community bylaws. And if the debris pile wasn't removed within 48 hours, I'd face an additional $50 per day in penalties. $500. For building a treehouse that no bylaw prohibited. And now $50 a day until I cleared away the evidence of her crime. It wasn't just punishment. It was humiliation dressed up as official business. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking harder with each pass. By the 4th, I felt the heat rising up my neck. Karen had destroyed the treehouse with her crew of hired men, and now she wanted me to pay her for the privilege of cleaning up her mess? My son noticed the way I crumpled the paper in my fist. "Is it bad, Daddy?" he asked softly. I forced a smile, smoothing the letter back out as if it wasn't worth the anger. "It's just more of Karen's nonsense," I said. "We'll take care of it." But inside, I knew I wasn't going to just take care of it. Not this time. That afternoon, I walked the wreckage like a crime scene investigator. The beams lay scattered, nails bent, boards splintered in half. Some pieces still bore the faint crayon markings my son had drawn. A crude pirate flag, a smiling sun, the outline of a treasure chest. Each fragment was a reminder of what she had stolen. I photographed everything. Close-ups of the broken wood. Wide shots of the gutted tree. Even the splinter that had grazed my son's cheek. I kept it in a plastic bag. I snapped photos of the dirt where the hired crew's boots had left deep impressions. Proof that strangers had trespassed onto my property without consent. And then I turned my camera toward the oak itself. The tree was scarred, jagged cuts left raw where the boards had been ripped away. It wasn't just vandalism. It was a violation of nature, of something alive and rooted in our yard long, before Karen's name ever appeared on an HOA roster. By evening, I had compiled over 100 photographs. I backed them up on my computer, emailed them to myself, even stored copies on a USB drive. I knew what Karen was capable of, and I wasn't about to let her bury the evidence. That night, the neighborhood group chat lit up again. Karen had posted a message, smug as ever. Reminder, fines are issued for violations. The board will enforce penalties without exception. Debris removal is the homeowner's responsibility. Several neighbors clicked the thumbs up icon. A few stayed silent. But one, a man named Paul who lived 2 doors down, replied, "Maybe we should consider exceptions when a child's safety and happiness are at stake. This feels wrong." Karen fired back instantly. "Rules are rules. Emotions don't override bylaws. Rules are rules." Her favorite refrain, repeated like gospel. But I knew better now. Rules were only as strong as the person enforcing them, and enforcement could crumble when the right spotlight was cast. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen. If she wanted a paper war, I would meet her on that battlefield. But my ammunition would be stronger. Evidence, testimony, and the truth. Because while Karen could write fines, I could write history. And history has a way of favoring those who fight for justice. The next step was clear. Document everything. If Karen wanted to bury me under fines, I was going to bury her under proof. I started with the neighbors. Quietly, carefully, I knocked on doors. Some wouldn't answer, pretending not to be home when they saw me through the peephole. Others opened just wide enough to whisper a few words. Mrs. Jenkins, the one who had warned me not to stir the pot, finally admitted she'd watched the demolition from her kitchen window. "I thought it was wrong," she said, wringing her hands. "But Karen, she intimidates people. I didn't want to get involved." Involved. I repeated, my voice sharper than intended. She ordered strangers onto my property. My son was nearly hit by falling wood. That's not intimidation. That's dangerous. Mrs. Jenkins nodded nervously, her eyes darting toward the street, as if Karen might appear at any second. If the police ask, I'll tell them what I saw, she promised. That was enough for now. I moved on to Paul, the neighbor who had spoken up in the chat. He didn't hesitate. I'll back you up, he said firmly. She's been running this place like a dictatorship for years. Someone needs to stop her. He even offered to write a formal statement. Slowly, piece by piece, I was building a case. Photos, witnesses, chat transcripts, each one a brick in the wall I would use to box Karen in. But the most important piece came from my own son. One evening, as we sat in the living room, he picked up the little plastic bucket he used to haul toys into his treehouse. His eyes welled up as he said, I was scared, Daddy. I thought the tree was going to fall on me. I froze. It was the kind of statement that cut straight to the bone. Pure, unfiltered truth from the mouth of a child. And I knew, in any courtroom, in any police station, those words would matter more than anything else. I wrote it down exactly as he said it, his words preserved like sacred testimony. I didn't want him to have to repeat them. He had been through enough. But I needed that memory recorded, undeniable. By now, my binder of evidence was thicker than Karen's own HOA handbook. Photos slid into plastic sleeves. Witness statements clipped together. Screenshots printed in bold. It wasn't just a defense anymore. It was an offense. And the more I gathered, the more I realized something crucial. Karen wasn't just targeting me. She had a history. Paul told me about the time she fined a family for leaving a kiddie pool in their backyard. Mrs. Jenkins recalled how she forced a retiree to repaint his fence 3 times because the shade of white wasn't uniform enough. And another neighbor, too afraid to go on record yet, whispered about Karen threatening to tow his daughter's car for parking too close to the curb. This wasn't about rules. This was about control. About a woman so consumed with power that she'd forgotten what community meant. I sat at the kitchen table that night, flipping through the binder I created. My son was asleep upstairs, his bear tucked under his arm, his small breath steady at last. And I whispered a promise into the silence. I'll protect you, and I'll make her pay. Because the truth was, this wasn't just evidence. It was a weapon. And soon, Karen would learn what happens when the people you try to break decide to fight back. It was late, the kind of quiet night when the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. The wreckage of the treehouse was gone now. I had hauled the boards into the garage, not because Karen ordered me to, but because I couldn't stand watching my son glance at it every time he played outside. Each splintered board was a reminder, a scar too raw to leave exposed. That night, after brushing his teeth and tugging on his pajamas, my boy padded into the living room. He carried his stuffed bear under one arm, the fur worn thin from years of clutching. His eyes were heavy with sleep, but there was something else in them too, a weight no child should have to carry. Daddy? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I turned off the TV and patted the couch beside me. He climbed up, curling against me the way he used to when he was younger. Why does the bad lady hate me? I froze. For a moment, the words didn't register. But then they hit, sharp as glass, cutting straight into my chest. Hate. My son thought he was hated. Not disliked. Not misunderstood. Hated. And by a grown woman who should have known better than to target a child. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. She doesn't hate you, buddy, I said softly. She just doesn't understand. But he looked up at me, his eyes searching mine for the truth. She broke my treehouse. She yelled at you. She smiled when I cried. That means she hates me. His small voice cracked, and tears welled up again. I pulled him into my arms, holding him close, feeling the tremor of his tiny body against mine. He was right, of course. Karen had smiled. She had dismissed his tears. She hadn't just broken wood. She had broken something inside him. How could I explain that some people hurt others just because they crave power? How could I make him understand that sometimes cruelty has no reason, no sense? I kissed the top of his head. Listen to me, I said, my voice firm now. What she did was wrong. Very wrong. But it's not your fault. And it doesn't mean she hates you. It means she doesn't know what it means to care about people. She doesn't know how to be kind. That's her problem, not yours." He sniffled, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "But she can't break everything, right?" I pulled back, looking into his eyes. "No," I said. "She can't. She can break wood, but she can't break us. And I promise you this, she's not going to win." He leaned into me again, finally relaxing, his breathing slowing as he drifted toward sleep. But the question stayed with me, long after I carried him to bed and tucked the bear under his arm. Why does the bad lady hate me? It was the kind of question no parent wants to hear. And in that moment, I knew the fight wasn't just about rules or fines anymore. It wasn't even about justice for me. It was about protecting my son's heart, showing him that bullies don't win, that when someone tries to crush you, you rise higher. And that meant it was time to take this battle beyond the HOA. The next morning, I loaded my binder of evidence into the car. Photos, statements, chat transcripts, even my son's words written down exactly as he'd spoken them. It was all there. My hands didn't tremble as I closed the binder. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt steady, focused. The police station sat just outside town, a squat brick building with a flag flapping in the breeze. I parked, took a deep breath, and carried the binder inside. The air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Behind the desk sat an officer, mid-40s, uniform crisp, eyes tired but alert. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Yes," I said firmly. "I need to report property destruction, an endangerment of a child." That got his attention. He gestured to a chair. "Tell me what happened." I opened the binder and slid the first photo across the desk, the wreckage of the treehouse. Then another, the scarred oak. Then another, the splinter that grazed my son's cheek. With each photo, I explained the demolition, the strangers Karen had brought onto my property, the threats, the fines. The officer flipped to the pages slowly, his brow furrowing deeper with every detail. "And your son was present when this happened?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "He was standing right there. If one of those beams had fallen the wrong way, we wouldn't be sitting here calmly. We'd be in a hospital, or worse." The officer leaned back in his chair, tapping the edge of the binder. "Do you have witnesses?" "Yes." I slid forward the written statements from Paul and Mrs. Jenkins. Others saw it too. Some are scared to come forward, but I can get more. He nodded, flipping through the testimonies. "And this was done under the authority of the HOA? Under the authority of Karen." I corrected. "She doesn't have legal power to order demolitions. She doesn't have authority to send strangers onto private property. She did this because she thinks the HOA bylaws make her queen of the neighborhood. But I've read those bylaws cover to cover, and nothing in them gives her the right to do this." The officer leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You're right. HOAs can enforce fines. They can take you to civil court. But trespass, property destruction, endangerment of a minor, that's not HOA business. That's criminal." Hearing those words was like a door opening in my chest. Finally, someone else saw it for what it was. Not just a neighbor dispute, not just HOA politics, a crime. The officer closed the binder and looked me in the eye. "We're going to investigate. We'll need statements from your son. If you're comfortable, we'll also need to speak with the board members she brought with her. If what you're saying checks out, and from what I see here, it will... Karen could be facing serious charges." I exhaled, a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. For the first time, it felt like the tide was turning. When I left the station, the sun felt brighter, the air lighter. My son was waiting at home, his eyes wide when I walked through the door. "Did you tell the police, Daddy?" he asked. I smiled and crouched down to his level. "I did. And guess what? They're going to help us. The bad lady doesn't get to decide everything anymore." His face lit up, the shadow of fear finally lifting, replaced by something I hadn't seen in days. Hope. That night, as he fell asleep with his bear tucked under his arm, I sat at the window, staring at the houses lying neatly in the dark. For once, Karen's house didn't feel so threatening, because now She wasn't just a bully with a binder. She was a criminal under investigation. And soon, she was going to learn that the law was stronger than any rule she had ever written. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of day where the air felt heavy and restless, like a storm waiting to break. I was mowing the lawn when I saw the police cruiser roll into the neighborhood. Heads turned, curtains parted. Every neighbor noticed when that black and white car eased down our perfect suburban street, its tires crunching against the pavement. It didn't stop at my house. It didn't stop at Paul's. It kept rolling until it pulled right up in front of Karen's two-story brick home, the one with immaculate hedges trimmed like soldiers standing at attention. I cut the mower's engine and leaned against the handle, my heart pounding. This was it. 2 officers stepped out, one of them the same man who had taken my statement. They walked with purpose, their belts jangling softly, their notebooks tucked under their arms. Karen was already outside, as if she'd sensed them coming. She stood at the top of her porch steps, binder clutched tightly against her chest like a shield. "Good afternoon, ma'am," the officer said, his tone professional but firm. "We need to ask you some questions regarding a reported incident on Mr. S. property." I couldn't hear every word, but I saw the way Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. She straightened her shoulders, raising her chin like she was preparing for a duel. "I was enforcing the bylaws," she snapped, her voice carrying across the street. The Treehouse was an unauthorized structure. I acted within my authority as HOA president. The officer flipped open his notebook. "Ma'am, the issue is not the Treehouse itself. The issue is that you ordered individuals onto private property without the homeowner's consent. You authorized the destruction of private property. And a minor was present during this action, creating a risk of harm." Karen's face reddened. She adjusted her grip on the binder, as though she could hide behind it. "Safety concerns justified immediate action," she said sharply. "The board has discretion." "Not in this case," the officer replied. His voice was calm, but his words cut clean through her defenses. "You don't have the legal right to trespass. You don't have the right to destroy property. And you certainly don't have the right to endanger a child. Those are potential criminal offenses, not HOA matters." The neighborhood had gone still. People had come out onto porches, gathered on sidewalks. A couple leaned against their car, arms crossed. Paul stood near his driveway, arms folded, a look of satisfaction spreading across his face. For the first time, the balance of power was shifting. Karen noticed the crowd, too. Her eyes darted around, calculating, searching for allies. But no one spoke up, not even the board members who usually flanked her. They weren't there now. She was alone, and she knew it. "You're making a mistake," she said finally, her voice wavering just enough to betray the crack in her armor. "This is harassment. I've done nothing wrong. I protected this community for years, and this is the thanks I get." The officer closed his notebook. "We'll be following up with formal charges," he said simply. "You'll be notified of the next steps. In the meantime, I suggest you refrain from any further actions regarding your neighbor's property." And just like that, the gavel came down. Not from Karen's binder, not from her fake authority, but from the real law. The officers turned and walked back to their cruiser. Karen stood frozen on her porch. Binder clutched to her chest like a child holding a broken toy. Her kingdom was crumbling, and everyone could see it. As the cruiser rolled away, Paul caught my eye and gave a small nod. And I knew what he meant. The tide had turned. That night, the neighborhood group chat lit up like fireworks. Usually, Karen was the one leading the conversations, posting long, self-righteous announcements about trash bins, lawn heights, or unauthorized decorations. But this time, it wasn't her voice filling the screen. It was everyone else's. "I can't believe she actually destroyed the treehouse. I didn't know a child was almost hurt. That's insane. She's finally getting what she deserves." For the first time in years, Karen's name was followed not by approval or silence, but by outrage. People who had once nodded along with her "rules are rules" mantra were now speaking up, emboldened by the sight of police at her door. I watched the messages roll in, my son asleep upstairs, his stuffed bear tucked under his chin. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of hope, not just for justice, but for change. The next day, Neighbors I barely knew stopped me on the sidewalk. A man from 3 streets over shook his head in disbelief. "I've wanted to stand up to her for years," he admitted. "But I didn't want to be the target. You showed us it's possible." Mrs. Jenkins came by with a plate of cookies, her voice trembling as she apologized for not speaking up sooner. "I was scared," she confessed. We all were. But seeing the police at her house, it was like watching a bully finally get called out. Even the 2 board members who had stood beside Karen that day sought me out. One of them, a tired-looking man named Roger, admitted she pressured us. Made it sound like if we didn't go along, we'd lose our positions. But I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up to hurt kids. The cracks in her empire were spreading fast, and Karen knew it. She tried to salvage control the following evening, posting a long, frantic message in the group chat. "Neighbors, do not be misled by rumors. The police are mistaken. I acted within my rights. Everything I've done has been for the good of this community. If we allow emotions to override order, our property values will plummet and chaos will reign." But instead of support, her post was met with silence. And then the first open challenge. Paul replied simply, "Property values aren't worth more than child safety." The thread exploded after that. Dozens of comments poured in, one after another, rejecting her authority. "We need a new president. She's abused her power for too long. It's time for a vote." For the first time in years, Karen was no longer dictating the narrative. The community was. I read every word, feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Vindication. My son had been right to ask why she hated him. She did. She hated anything she couldn't control. But now the community was seeing her clearly, not as protector of order, but as what she truly was, a tyrant in a cul-de-sac kingdom. That night, as I tucked my son into bed, he asked me quietly, "Is the bad lady gone yet?" I smiled and brushed his hair back from his forehead. "Not yet," I said, "but soon." Because for the first time, it wasn't just me standing against Karen. It was all of us. And that meant the end of her reign was closer than ever. Just when I thought Karen had finally been silenced, she found her voice again. That's the thing about bullies. They don't surrender. They scheme. It started with another letter, slid into my mailbox on a Monday morning. The envelope bore the HOA's logo again, but the tone of this one was different. It wasn't about fines this time. It was an incident report, and the incident was me. According to Karen, I was the one who endangered my child. The treehouse, she claimed, was unstable, poorly constructed, and unsafe for minors. She wrote that she had acted only after receiving multiple complaints about the structure's hazardous design. In her version of the story, I wasn't a father building a sanctuary for his son. I was a negligent homeowner who had recklessly put a child in danger. And Karen? She painted herself as a reluctant hero, the protector, the one who had swooped in to prevent tragedy before it happened. Reading her words, my hands shook with rage. I could practically hear her smug voice narrating every line. She was twisting reality into a weapon, hoping that if she repeated the lie enough, someone would believe it. But she didn't stop at the letter. The very next day, she stood up at the HOA's monthly meeting, binder in hand, and launched into a speech that dripped with false concern. "This community deserves safe, responsible homeowners," she declared, her eyes darting toward me where I sat in the back. "We cannot tolerate negligence that endangers our children." That treehouse was a tragedy waiting to happen. I acted not out of malice, but out of duty. A few heads nodded uncertainly. I saw Mrs. Jenkins biting her lip, clearly uncomfortable. Paul rolled his eyes so hard I thought they might stick. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, my binder of evidence heavy in my hands. "With all due respect," I said, my voice steady, "Karen isn't protecting anyone. She's rewriting the story to save herself. I built that treehouse carefully, securely, with my own hands. There were no complaints, no hazards. The only danger came when Karen ordered strangers onto my property and tore it down while my son stood beneath it." I opened the binder, sliding photos across the table, the splinter that had grazed my son, the gouges in the oak, the witness statements. This isn't negligence. This is destruction. and everyone here knows it. A murmur rippled through the room. Even those who had once feared her were starting to shift in their seats, unsure whether to keep defending a woman who now looked less like a president and more like a cornered animal. Karen's face flushed crimson. She slammed her binder shut, her voice rising with desperation. He's lying. He's twisting this. I've done nothing but protect this community, and this is how I'm treated? Like a criminal? The irony hung thick in the air. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because the truth was already on my side, and the more she fought it, the more tangled in her lies she became. That night, as I walked home with my son's hand in mine, I realized something important. Karen wasn't just afraid of the police anymore. She was afraid of losing her power. And when people like her feel that slipping, they lash out. But every desperate swing she took only made her weaker. The call came 3 days later. I was in the garage, sorting through the last of the treehouse debris, when my phone buzzed. It was the officer I'd spoken with at the station. "Mr.," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I wanted to let you know we completed our preliminary investigation. We've reviewed your evidence, the witness statements, and the HOA president's actions. Based on our findings, we're moving forward with charges." My breath caught. Charges? Yes. Destruction of property, trespassing, and reckless endangerment of a minor. Ms. will be receiving notice this week. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Relief surged in me like a wave, but so did something else. Vindication. All the sleepless nights, all the anger, all the worry in my son's eyes. It hadn't been for nothing. The law had seen what I had seen from the beginning. Karen had crossed a line she couldn't erase with fines or lies. That evening, the cruiser returned to our neighborhood. Just like before, heads turned, curtains twitched, whispers filled the air. This time, the officers didn't just ask questions. They handed Karen a citation, right there on her front porch. I watched from across the street as she snatched the papers from their hands, her face twisted in disbelief. "This is absurd," she shouted, her voice carrying down the block. "You can't do this." I was protecting the children, but the officer didn't flinch. "Ma'am, you have the right to contest this in court. Until then, these charges stand." Neighbors gathered in clusters, murmuring. Some shook their heads. Others whispered. Finally, for years, Karen had ruled through fear and fines. Now, she was the one under scrutiny, her binder powerless against the weight of the law. That night, the group chat exploded again. This time, it wasn't outrage directed at me. It was open rebellion against her. She's lost it. We need new leadership. I can't believe she endangered a kid. Karen tried to defend herself, typing furiously. These charges are false. I acted responsibly. This is all a misunderstanding. But her words fell flat. For the first time, no one rallied to her side. Even her most loyal supporters stayed silent. She was isolated, exposed. I sat back, watching the threat unfold, my son beside me. He leaned against my arm, sleepy but smiling. "Did the police make her stop?" he asked. I nodded. "They did. She can't hurt us anymore." He grinned, his eyes closing as he drifted toward sleep. And in that quiet moment, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Peace. Karen wasn't gone yet. There would be hearings, meetings, maybe even a court date. But the spell was broken. Her reign of intimidation was over. Because the one thing Karen had never understood was that power doesn't come from binders or fines. It comes from people. And once the people stop believing in you, you've already lost. And Karen? She had lost everything. The morning after Karen was charged, the air in the neighborhood felt lighter. It wasn't just me who noticed it. Everyone did. Lawns seemed greener, conversations friendlier, laughter from children rang louder. It was as if a dark cloud had finally drifted away, leaving sunshine in its wake. My son was the one who said it best. As we walked past the oak tree, its scars still raw from where the boards had been ripped away, he tugged on my hand and whispered, "Can we build it again?" For the first time in weeks, I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said firmly, "we'll build it again. And this time, it'll be stronger than ever." His face lit up, his eyes sparkling with joy I thought Karen had stolen forever. He darted to the garage, dragging out a box of toy hammers and plastic wrenches, pretending to help. I laughed, ruffling his hair. He wasn't just asking for a treehouse. He was asking for his childhood back, and I was determined to give it to him. I called Paul first. Within minutes, he was at my door, toolbox in hand. "You didn't think you were doing this alone, did you?" he said with a grin. Soon, others joined. Neighbors who had once kept silent, now eager to make amends. A retired carpenter down the street offered his skills. A young couple brought over sandwiches and drinks. Kids from the block showed up to watch, cheering as the frame began to rise. Piece by piece, the new treehouse took shape. Each hammer strike was more than construction. It was defiance. Every nail driven into the wood was a declaration that Karen couldn't destroy us. She couldn't destroy joy. She couldn't destroy community. My son watched in awe, climbing up the ladder as soon as the first platform was secured. "It's higher than before," he shouted, his voice carrying through the neighborhood. Laughter rippled through the crowd. For once, the sound of joy wasn't met with glares or fines. It was celebrated. That evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold, the treehouse stood proud and tall. Stronger, sturdier, brighter. My son sat inside, waving down at me with both hands. "Thank you, Daddy," he called. I swallowed the lump in my throat, blinking back tears. "Thank you, buddy," I whispered, because in truth, he had given me something too. The reminder that no matter how cruel the world can be, love and resilience always outlast fear. The neighbors clapped, cheering as if we'd won a championship game. And in a way, we had. Not just me, not just my son, but all of us, together. We had reclaimed what Karen had tried to take. The oak tree still bore its scars. But now, those scars were hidden beneath something beautiful, something stronger, something that would last. And as I looked around at the smiling faces, I realized Karen's reign was over. She had ruled through fear. But now, the neighborhood was united not by fear, but by hope. If the rebuilding of the treehouse was the community's victory, Karen's downfall was its justice. The charges moved quickly. Within weeks, Karen was summoned to court. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People whispered about it at the grocery store, in the school parking lot, on the sidewalks during evening walks. The woman who had once wielded power like a weapon was now the one facing judgment. On the morning of her hearing, I didn't plan to go. I had already said my piece, given my evidence. But as I watched my son climb into his treehouse, laughing freely for the first time in weeks, I realized I needed to see it through. Not just for me, but for him. The courthouse was cold, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Karen sat at the defendant's table, binder still in her lap, like a relic of power she couldn't let go. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. Gone was the smug confidence she had once worn like armor. The judge read the charges aloud. Destruction of property, trespassing, reckless endangerment of a minor. Each word was a hammer striking nails into the coffin of her authority. Karen's lawyer tried to spin the story. He painted her as a concerned citizen, a leader burdened by responsibility, a woman who had acted only to protect the children. But the evidence was undeniable. The photos, the statements, the witnesses, the truth. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I described the day she tore down the treehouse, how my son had stood there crying, how close he had come to being hurt. I described the fear in his eyes, the question he had asked me, "Why does the bad lady hate me?" My voice caught when I repeated it, but I didn't care. The courtroom needed to hear it. The judge's gaze hardened as he turned back to Karen. "Your actions were not protective," he said sternly. "They were reckless, authoritarian, and dangerous. Homeowners associations are not above the law, and you are not above accountability." The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Karen was fined heavily, ordered to pay restitution for the damages. She was stripped of her position as HOA president. And with a final note of irony, the judge mandated community service. In a children's program, Karen's face crumpled, her binder slipping from her hands onto the floor. She had ruled the neighborhood for years, bending it to her will. But now, in one decisive stroke, her power was gone. When I walked out of that courthouse, the air felt lighter than it ever had. The weight I'd carried for weeks, the anger, the frustration, the helplessness, had lifted. That evening, back in the neighborhood, people gathered again beneath the oak tree. My son sat in his rebuilt treehouse, waving down at the crowd. "It's even better than before," he shouted, his voice ringing with pride. The neighbors clapped, their cheers rising into the warm night air. And for the first time in a long time, our community felt like a family. As I looked up at my son, framed by the wooden beams of his new fortress, I realized Karen had given us something without meaning to. By trying to tear us down, she had brought us together. By trying to silence us, she had given us a voice. By trying to destroy joy, she had made it stronger. And as a star began to twinkle above, I whispered the words I knew my son needed to hear. "Justice was served, buddy. She paid big, and she'll never hurt you again." He smiled down at me, the light from the treehouse lantern glowing on his face. For him, it wasn't about fines or courts or bylaws. It was simpler than that. For him, justice was a treehouse, and this time it would stand forever.